Hello everyone, it's Mike Levin from MikeLevinSEO.com. Out walking the dog on Sunday, August 3rd at around 6 p.m. and went to work early this morning to get some coding done. Hardly got a piece of code in, but I learned a lot about my new platform, which is Pygreen sitting on Flask and the Mako templates, on Python, on Arch Linux, on the Raspberry Pi. I mostly learned about the Mako templates today and the Python execution context, which I'm most familiar with in a web context from mod_Python for Apache, which does not follow the WSGI standards set forth by the Python consortium people. Pygreen does because Flask does. And it turns out that Pygreen is a very lightweight layer on top of Flask in order to make it support the Mako templates and to allow for the generating of optional static HTML files to make a really fast website when the dynamic behavior isn't required. And I learned today how to get what people often call the server variables of the web server, things like the query string value. And basically it was a whole lot of learning. But with every video I publish, I see that people have this hunger for Vim knowledge, the VI improved text editor that's becoming the heir apparent of the Unix/Linux world as the default text editor that's always there. Now, I'm going to say a few words about Vim because I think it's you need this broader context to even approach learning it. It is so radically different from anything else most people have ever used that it will turn most people off right away, and it leads to the common wisdom that Vim isn't for everybody. And I tend to disagree with that. I think that it is just a significantly different text editor than most, so different that if you don't approach it with an open mind and a fairly high tolerance to frustration, you will get discouraged. But just because everyone gets discouraged by Vim at first doesn't mean it's not for everyone. It's only for those people who don't get through that steep learning curve. And I have equated it to learning to walk, and you got to crawl before you can walk. And as a recent father, my kid is now 3 years old, I have a appreciation for what it takes to learn to crawl and then to walk. It's not easy, and it's very analogous to learning Vim. You're not starting from your muscle skills of how to use a mouse and highlight text and copying and pasting the way you do with every other piece of software since the Macintosh from 1984, which has heavily predisposed us, which kind of built on the work of X Windows before it. And it comes from a day that people didn't even necessarily have graphics on their computers. And it evolved from a tool that was meant for editing one line at a time on a thing that might have, not a screen with 80 columns and 24 rows, but a single line of text, like a label printer. And you were supposed to be able to program these things through that. And so the EX program was written, and then it was enhanced, and Bill Joy, one of the original founders of Sun from the early days, maybe not a founder, but one of those early people at Sun, wrote the original VI, basing it on the line editor that came before it, so that it worked well in really low bandwidth situations where you had to be very economic, both in terms of the bandwidth that you were using and the keystrokes, because if you typed a long word and it didn't work for you, you had to type that long word over again, and that might both be a weight and it might be expensive. So Bill Joy himself said, you know, he didn't like it. It was one of those creations that, you know, it was made for a different time and he would do it different again if he could. And I'm here to say, not a good idea. He created something which could never have been created under other circumstances, and it's very good that it exists because, well, this is where I start to talk about there is a language of text editing, a vocabulary, a combining nouns and verbs to make things happen, and they can combine in new ways. And when you think about it out loud in your head, you can actually just start to learn Vim better and deeper by understanding what you're doing. And then just like with a written word, where you start to stop reading individual words on a page and you start recognizing sentences, so too is it with Vim. To me, things like VIPGQ, I know visually exactly what's going to happen on the screen if I typed that. If I wanted to, you know, delete from where I am to the end of the document or to the beginning of the document, I know how to do that, not because I know the specific commands, but because I know how to do something from where I'm at to the end of the page in general. And it takes a while. I'm myself rather new and green, having been at it already for a couple of years. I have basic proficiency in it, but I don't, I'm by no means expert. But I plan to become expert. And another thing that's interesting about it is you don't really have to customize it heavily to your liking. You can sit down at almost any you know, default Vim configuration and be proficient if you're proficient, which is not necessarily true with the other beloved text editor from ages ago, which is Emacs. Emacs is all about self-modifying stuff, macros, and it is from the Lisp, the lineage of Lisp, and it is you know, something where you have to take your configuration with you to remain productive on new machines. Vim is a lot more like a generic video game that you learn to use that plays the same way anywhere you sit down. And there's a few other things you need to know about it. If you're planning on learning it, forget GVIM, the graphical version of Vim. Just use the plain text one. And it's not even really intended to run natively on your desktop. It's something that's installed on remote servers that you log into through shell interfaces. And it's a place where you can use text editors that you couldn't use your traditional text editor. And if you want WYSIWYG, you just, you know, use whatever, Sublime or Notepad++. If you want graphics, don't bother with Vim. And if you use graphics and you want to, you know, edit on those servers that same way, you need to either transmit the file to your local machine or do SSH or SFTP login. And you don't ever have to bother with that nonsense if you just know VI or Vim. You just log in, you edit the text file in place, and there's no muss, no fuss. Very powerful. And other things you need to know is when you install Vim, if you're on a Unix machine, you want the NOx, Vim hyphen, not Unix, but Ubuntu machine. You want Vim-NOx, which stands for no X Windows or no graphical user interface. And I think it comes pre-installed on the Mac, because the Mac is POSIX compliance Unix even more than Linux is. Although if you want Vim, you might have to get that somewhere else, but you'll at least have the basic VI editor on any Mac. And if you want it on Windows, probably Cygwin is the best way to go about it. But you'll have to select it, I think, from the little expanding menus of of what optional Cygwin software you want installed. And then if you log into anything on the cloud, it's probably there, and if it's not, it's just one quick little remote package manager command away from being installed. There's some little things you can do to make it nicer, like turning color syntax coding on. I like to do that. But all in all, you don't really have to do that much customization. Maybe your tab indent, you know, space amount, that kind of stuff. And I'm going to try and do more Vim tutorials because clearly it's where the interest is. Every time I use it in a headline of one of my YouTube videos, it gets shared and the view count goes up. So I will try and feed that hunger. Well, thanks for listening to me, and hope to talk to you soon. And don't forget to share the video and subscribe.